Hello everyone! Today we are going to be reviewing my 5-star reads and recommendations. Now, I have a bone to pick with the book review community. It seems like every time I click on a video titled My 5-Star Reads and Reviews, I am going to get a permutation of the same 200 books that everyone else is reading and talking about, as though those are the only books our 5-star reads can come from. Now I know those books are popular, so people click on those videos, and I also know that those books are popular for a reason, and many of them probably are 5-star reads that deserve the accolades that they are getting. But millions of books have been published every single year, and there are millions of books to choose from, so today I'm going to give love to a large number of my 5-star reads that I have been reading since 2019. I'm going to show them all to you one by one in Goodreads, and I'm going to talk about why I like them in a couple sentences to try to convince you to try something that maybe you haven't tried before. And I want to hear from you throughout this process, so if you want to share your 5-star reads that you don't hear people talking about, then please put those in the comment section down below. I'm always looking for more recommendations. As a little review for the sub-selection of books that we are picking from, I wanted to go through the numbers of books that I have read. I am only focusing on books that I have read since I've finished college, so 2019. In 2019, I read 77 books. 2020, I read 178, so I didn't start reading again earnestly until after I graduated college, so 2019 is truly like June onwards. 2020 probably would have been higher, but we know what happened. 2021, 156 books. 2022, I read 202 books. 2023, I read 272 books, and I have read 103 books this year. So from this subset of books, I found some of my top 5-star reads, ranging from recently published to published many years ago, and I'm going to try to sell you on them. So let's dive in. And as you can see, I have a large number to go through. So each one of these is only going to get a couple of sentences for me to sell you on the book. The first is The Long Tomorrow by Leigh Brackett. This was either a Hugo finalist or a Hugo winner, and it is a post-apocalyptic story about a boy growing up in a landscape that has gone through nuclear disaster. I find that the nuclear disaster was very popular in sci-fi from the 70s or 60s and 70s, which makes sense. I actually read the cut one with this cover right down here as opposed to this one, but I'm not particular when adding to Goodreads. I love this one. It's about a coming-of-age story of a boy who's growing up in a world that has been devastated by nuclear destruction, and he has to, come to terms with what happened and find his own way in his own path forward. This is again by Leigh Brackett, who is a fantastic science fiction writer who wrote a lot of good books. Next is Terry Pratchett. If you have not read Terry Pratchett, this is one that's more on the popular side, so I don't want to get any ideas that I'm all doing niche. I love Terry Pratchett. Equal Rights is the first one in the Witch-like series. So within the whole Discworld series, which is Terry Pratchett's main world, there are also like sub-storylines, and there are much better diagrams online than I'm going to talk through about how to kind of enter the world and where to start. But I like the witches, and I think Equal Rights is about the witches. It's part of the Witches #1. This one was just really funny. I liked it. 5-star read. A lot of Terry Pratchett gets 5-star for me, so please check this out if you've never checked out Terry Pratchett. But if you've really never checked out Terry Pratchett, make sure to check out one of the great diagrams online, which will show you how to enter the series and reading it. Next, this is Town of Evening Calm, Country of Cherry Blossoms by Fumio Kuno. This was a manga, but if you're not a manga reader, stay with me. Fumio Kuno writes books that are about post-war Japan. That seems to be her specialty, and she read another one which I also recommend called Our World or In Our World. I think it's on this list, so stay tuned. But this one is about a woman living in the aftermath of Hiroshima, the bombing of Hiroshima in World War II. I always say that the people who pay the biggest price for war are usually the civilians who have to face consequences that they never asked for and never signed up for. And so this was a very, very moving manga series, and Fumio Kuno is a master at her craft. I said manga series, but it's just a standalone. Town of Evening Calm, Country of Cherry Blossoms. It's in 3 parts. I loved it. This was fantastic. I read this actually very recently, but it was published many years ago. So this says 2015, but 2015 was almost 10 years ago at this point. Jim C. Hines. So this was a science fiction fantasy book, or Jim Hines is a science fiction fantasy writer. This is Goblin Quest, which is a different take on the D&D party adventure theme. So if you like fantasy, definitely check out Jig the Goblin, which is this is Jig the Goblin #1 Goblin Quest. I listened to this on audiobook and I actually really liked it. I liked the audiobook, I liked the narration, I thought it was really funny and it gave a different twist to the D&D story adventure. And this is again a little older, published in 2004, but I don't think that matters. You can probably get this for quite cheap in the trade paperback variety, so definitely check that out. The mass market paperback is what I mean. Next, Sunshine Sketches of a Little Town by Stephen Leacock. This was a humorous collection of not fantasy, but fictional stories from a fictional Canadian town, and I thought it was really funny. I liked this. It was just short stories, so you could read them in collections, but it was kind of like getting an inside look of a small town and what life is like there and how funny it was. I think about this one a lot, even though I read this a long time ago. I say a long time ago. I think I read this in 2019, but I still like this one, and I actually want to pick up a physical copy of this book because I really enjoyed it. This one is a little older too. It says published in 2006, at least this variety. This is Terry Pratchett, Guards. If you like Discworld or you're looking to get into Discworld, I also like the City Watch sub-storyline, which is following the City Watch in the city of Ankh-Morpork. I don't really know if I'm saying that correctly, but Guards is a funny book. I actually own a copy of this book, and I don't own a lot of books, so I do recommend. Another great place to start Discworld, and another great sub-series of the overall Discworld series that I liked and enjoyed. Dangerous River, Adventure on the Nahanni. Now we're getting into some nonfiction. This is by R.M. Patterson, and this was based on journals from R.M. Patterson when he was exploring in northern Canada. So he was exploring the Nahanni River in the Nahanni, what's now the National Park or the National Reserve of Nahanni, and he canoed up the river over the course of a summer and then floated back down, and along the way he kept a journal, which he eventually turned into this narrative story, Dangerous River. Even though this was written originally in the 1950s, it says published 1999, but it was originally written in the 1950s. It was very relatable, and I think that sometimes when we read things that are several decades old, especially if we also didn't live through that time, it can feel a little unrelatable, but this one was quite relatable, quite funny, and he actually did the traveling in the mid-1920s, and this was an adventure story, sort of, but it was true, and I really enjoyed it. Nonfiction, so if you're looking for nonfiction, we have these tags down here: history, biography, nature, Canada, travel. Check it out. Next is Skipping Christmas by John Grisham. So I like this book, but I don't think a lot of other people like this book, and that's because I'm pretty sure John Grisham is known for other things. I'm pretty sure he's known for like his law books, I think, or like police procedurals. I'm not sure, but someone gave me this book to read when I was between places to live. I had moved to a different city and I was staying with some people, and they recommended, or they had a bunch of books on a shelf that I could read, and I picked this one up, and it's a family that decides they're not doing Christmas this year. I thought it was funny. I think the reason maybe some people didn't like it and rated it a little lower is because if they were reading John Grisham for his other style books and they picked up this, it was very different, but I thought it was super funny. I'm just now seeing that according to this title, it's now a major motion picture, which I've never seen. I'm not a big movie person, but this was a funny story. I was laughing the whole time, and I still think about this one, and as long as you're willing, I think, to separate John Grisham's other work from this, then it's fine. I read the one with this cover right here. So, Hawk Among Sparrows by Dean McLaughlin. This was a Hugo nominee for Best Novella in 1968, as you can see right here. So in this story, a fighter from World War II gets sent back to World War I, and as a result, he's stuck in World War I with his plane that is way overpowered for World War I technology, but also at the same time very useless when compared to World War I technology. So this story was entertaining for me. It is a novella, so it's quite short, so you don't have to commit a lot of time to it, and I've recommended this to other people. I liked it. I thought it was funny. Not funny, I thought it was interesting. Funny wasn't the right word. And I did like this time traveling sort of story. And also the idea of how technology that's maybe really advantageous in one era, if you go back in time, could be very overpowered for the technology of the era, but could also have gaps. This is A Grain of Sand, Nature's Secret Wonder by Gary Greenberg, and the foreword was by Stacy Keach. So this was photography of sand, and you can kind of see it on the cover. Like, they were close-up views of little grains of sand, high-powered photography. He calls it micro photography. This was fantastic. There's no pictures of the inside, so you just have to trust me from these little things that were put on the cover, but this was just a find I found in the photography section of my library, and it was fantastic. I cannot believe other people, not a lot of other people have found it, seeing that it only has a 102 rating, but almost a 5-star aggregate rating. So definitely not well known. This one is well known, over 1 million ratings, Into the Wild by Jon Krakauer. I thought this was fantastic. If you haven't read it, we're following Chris McCandless, who is a young man who just decided to throw away, that sounds like I'm passing judgment, who decided to give up the lifestyle that his parents had wanted him to follow, going to college, going to law school, going into a respectable profession, whatever he was going to do. He decided to hitchhike around the United States and eventually live in Alaska, which of course, I'm not spoiling anything, you know the story. He wound up dead. He was found by some hunters in this very famous bus. There were some things that I didn't like about this book overall, but overall it was a 5-star read. I thought it was great. I am nothing like Chris McCandless. I am not going to be walking into the Alaskan wilderness to kind of prove that I am the man above all men. But I think this is a classic that if you haven't read, you should. Although I do think this is probably one of the more popular ones on my list that people have talked about, that most people have read. And if you have read it, please let me know what you thought about this. Next up is Flatlands. This was written in the 1800s and by an English clergyman named Edwin Abbott. So this is about a land where everything is flat and you have it's a 2-dimensional land. And so there's little creatures in this 2-dimensional land that can't imagine life outside the 2-dimensional plane. And the idea is to kind of get us thinking about math and think about how us in the 3-dimensional plane are kind of, we take for granted the 3-dimensional space that we live in, and someone in 2-dimension would not be able to understand a 3-dimensional plane. This was fantastic despite being well over 100 years old. This was a must-read. It's only 96 pages, but this is the kind of book that I recommend to everyone, and it's had a lot of modern implications that I don't think Abbott would have foreseen. For example, now we are working in higher dimensions in mathematics. I say we as though I'm doing anything. I'm doing nothing in higher dimensions, but the idea that having to think in a dimension that's different from your own is also an application that came out of, it didn't come out of this book, but it relates to this book. And I thought it was fantastic. 5-star read. Next is The Rook by Daniel O'Malley. So this was a fiction paranormal story. I thought this was funny. I'm pretty sure I read this, I don't know the date on it. I read it right before the pandemic or possibly during the pandemic. I'm pretty sure during the pandemic, and I just thought it was funny. I thought some of the funniest parts of this were the fact that there are protesters in the book who knew what was going on. The idea is there is a government agency that's responsible for these paranormal things, and I thought it was a great book. I really liked it. I have not continued reading this series. I did have a move in at the end of the pandemic, I moved, so I have switched library systems a number of times in the last couple of years, and that switching of library systems means that sometimes when I start a series, it kind of gets lost in the shuffle when I have to return all these books and go to a new library system and rent a U-Haul and find a new apartment. There's a lot of steps and things get lost in the shuffle, and this is one that got lost in the shuffle that I want to return to because I really enjoyed. 59,000 ratings, so definitely not unpopular. This is another one by Fumio Kuno. This was it in this corner of the world. This is a young woman who is a bride in a difficult family situation as World War II is kicking off in Japan, and it has the view of the civilian experience of war. Of course, at the beginning of the war, there wasn't necessarily attacks on Japan. The United States entered the war after Japan had bombed Pearl Harbor, so initially when Japan goes to war with the United States, it's kind of happening in Hawaii, but of course the war does move into Japan with the bombings of Nagasaki and Hiroshima. So this is following not a soldier, not big political events, but a simple housewife trying to find her place in the world in a family that doesn't seem to like her, and grapple with the fact that war is going on around her. I think Fumio Kuno is a master at what she does. Between this and that Cherry Blossom book, Evening of Calm, Country of Cherry Blossoms, two fantastic reads that probably should be must-reads in school when studying World War II, in my personal opinion. Here's a nonfiction, Happy City, Transforming Our Lives Through Urban Design by Charles Montgomery. I have read this book multiple times, actually. I am very interested in how city design influences where we live, where we like to live, and how we live. I'm a big proponent for walkable cities, but I also grew up in a smaller town, and I do like that vibe as well. So I just like understanding how things in cities can be designed to be best for the environments and also give people the ability to choose to live in a place that meets their needs. Maybe they love the suburbs, maybe they love the inner city, maybe they love a farm. So this was a book that kind of talked about how urban design impacts our life. I've listened to this on audiobook twice, so I actually haven't read this book, but it was enjoyable and I love it, and I would recommend it to anyone looking to get into how urban design impacts our life. National Geographic Dawn to Dusk photographs. I struggle to say photographs because my brain never decides, do you want to say photograph, photography, or photographer, and it's a mess. This was a book that went from dawn to dusk throughout the, it looks like 400 pages, and it's photography. Fantastic, stunning. All of the National Geographic photography books that I have read have been absolutely fantastic. They probably cost a pretty penny, which is why I don't own any, but I do get them from my library, and this would be one that would make a great gift as well. So the whole book is about light throughout the day. Fantastic. This book fundamentally changed how I viewed learning languages and has transformed the way I learn languages. Fluent Forever, How to Learn Any Language Fast and Never Forget It by Gabriel Weiner, I'm going to say. This method will show you how to learn a foreign language and learn it fast. I went from not struggling, but I was just making very slow progress in my foreign language learning to in 18 months reaching a conversational and a comfortable conversational level and able to go to Germany and use German with a host family more or less comfortably. There were some stumbling blocks, but the progress was made so quickly that it was almost unbelievable, and I use a lot of these methods now, and I'm making very fast progress in additional languages. So this book changes how you learn a language. I always say, though, whatever method you're going to stick to is the one that works best for learning languages. But I think he presents a lot of the science behind it, and this is a game changer. If anyone says they're learning a language, I jump right in. I'm that annoying person. Hey, you got to check out Fluent Forever. I have checked this book out of my library so many times that I just need to buy a copy, because even though I move a lot, I don't like having a lot of books. At this point, it's ridiculous. Like, I'm like the person who owns this book in my library, and I just need to let the library copy have it and pick up my own. Game changer if you want to learn a foreign language, especially as an adult. The Midnight Plan of the Repo Man by W. Bruce Cameron. This is about a man who was destined to be a football star, but had an accident, had made a lot of mistakes as a young man, and as a result, he's now working as a repo man in a small town in the state of Michigan, and he's trying to kind of get his life back on track when things kind of go sideways and the paranormal starts to occur. It is a very funny book. I listened to the audiobook and I highly recommend the audiobook because I think the narrator did a great job. I took a summer road trip last summer where I just listened to this book and was driving all over the place in the United States, visiting places, and it was just fantastic. So I liked this one. I recommend it to everyone. I haven't read anything else by Bruce Cameron. The best way I can describe what he does is write dog books, and I'm not sure, I just haven't been willing to try any of the other dog books to see if they're as funny as this one. There's a dog on the cover, but in my opinion, the dog plays a supporting role. Sovietistan, Travels in Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan by Erica Fatland, and translated by Carrie Dixon, because Erica Fatland is Swedish. This is a woman who traveled through these previous former Soviet states and writes about her travels in it. This was fascinating. It's a massive book. It's like 500 pages, and I think I read it in 2 days flat. I have also read this, I think, during the pandemic. This was, yes, fantastic. I loved her writing and her style. She actually published another book called High, and it's travels in like Tibet, northern India. I got halfway through that book and the library wanted it back, surprise, surprise, because I had run out of time and people had it on hold. So I need to finish that one. But I love Erica Fatland's writing, and this was my entry point, and I recommend to anyone who's interested in reading about travel. And these are countries that not a lot of people visit. I'm going to take a sip of my coffee. The Goodbye Line by Riley, or not by Jill Orr. It's a Riley Ellison mystery. This one won a 5-star for me because it kind of falls in the category of cozy mystery, but most cozy mysteries that I read are a 3-star, which is fine. There's nothing wrong. You know what? I should devote a video to the often maligned 3-star read. There's a purpose for a 3-star read. I love a good cozy mystery when I'm coming off a book hangover, when I've just read a book that's so fantastic I don't want to read anything else, but I do want to read, so you're kind of torn because you know whatever you read next isn't going to live up to the book that you just read. That's a problem. And sometimes a cozy mystery is a great point there. You know what you're getting, it's fun, you get to solve the mystery, but you know it's not going to be fantastic writing. And I don't think that's any knock to the authors, because I think they know their niche and they're doing quite well. This one got 5 stars because it was a really good cozy mystery. So this is a cozy mystery that I loved. I liked the cover and the color, and I think it was just a fascinating cozy mystery that was better and exceeded my expectations. Return to Fukushima by Rebecca Bathory. So this is a photography collection from Fukushima. If you're not familiar, Fukushima was hit with an earthquake and then a tsunami in, I think it was 2011. And as a result, there was the destruction of a nuclear power plant. Not quite as bad as Chernobyl. Things were contained. We've learned from our mistakes, but there is an exclusion zone, and so there's these abandoned areas. And Rebecca Bathory does a good job capturing some of the destruction that came out of that, but also some of maybe the healing and the land recovering. I read a lot of stuff about Fukushima 3 months ago at this point, so I read this one recently. It's a photography collection. I just picked one volume, the Kaguya-sama Love is War series by Aka Akasaka. This was recommended by a friend and by a commenter in my comment section. This is a really funny series. I've run out of the series though that's available in my local library, so I'm going to have to start ordering it, and it's a big mess. Also check out the anime though. If you haven't for whatever reason read this series, it's very popular, so I think a lot of people who like manga have read this series, but if you haven't, check it out. It is funny. And it is romance, but I don't like explicit romance, so if you're worried about that, it's like rated T. It's fine. I do also want to say I like the rating systems on manga because I like knowing what I'm going to get into and what I might be exposed to. I'm a big fan. So, Haikyuu is a sports manga series, very popular, many people have recommended it. I put off reading this series because it was initially recommended to me by a guy who I later broke up with, and I was like, well, now I'm not gonna read it. That was a dumb decision. This is a fantastic sports manga about a volleyball team. It's probably the best known sports manga, and it actually got me to start signing up to go to volleyball rec leagues, and I've discovered that volleyball isn't the horrible sport I thought it was when I was in middle school. Having read this series, I was like, this sport looks fun. It's because it is, and maybe just my middle school team was mean. So now I've been playing volleyball in real life because of this series. It's 45 volumes, so it's quite a bit longer, and things like Kaguya-sama Love is War and Haikyuu explain why my numbers are so high every year. If you read 45 volumes, that's 45 books going towards your reading total. So, and those take a different amount of time to read than, say, like Sovietistan at 500 pages. Check Please, Book 1, #Hockey by Ngozi Kazu. This was recommended by my aunt, my sisters, everyone. This is super popular, so this one is no surprise. It's a comic series. So I put off reading this because my aunt didn't tell me it was a romance, because I don't usually like romance. Romance in manga is really the only exception, but this is more of a graphic novel. It's not a manga. I put off reading this because I thought it was a boy winning a hockey tournament, and I was not having it. I was like, I don't care about hockey. I'm sorry. I mean, like, I'll go support my local team, but and I've been watching the PWHL. I do like them. But I was like, I don't really think I care about hockey enough to, like, read this, but I wanted my aunt to get off my back, so I decided to read it. Fantastic. You can see right here all the literary awards, and it's deserving. It's actually a romance between two of the hockey players, which I did not expect. And apparently hockey romance is big right now. I'm not in the romance scene, so I don't really know about that, but I don't know if this kicked it off. Not sure. But this was much better than I expected. A Man and His Cat. This is another manga series. Again, I've read everything my library has, and maybe everything that's been translated into English. I'm not sure. But this is about an older man who's kind of adrift in life, and he adopts a cat, and the cat kind of changes the trajectory of his life. It's a who saved whom sort of a story, but I loved it. It's really, really sweet. And again, I just picked volume 1, but there's a lot of volumes. This is Flora Magnifica, The Art of Flowers in 4 Seasons. This is a photography book. Again, absolutely fantastic. It's by Makoto Azuma. High rating, but only 25 ratings, which is really surprising because the photography in here was excellent. Excellent. Love it. So check this one out if you want to see amazing photography of flowers. You can see kind of the vibe that you're getting from the cover. Cannot believe it has so low ratings. Maybe it was originally published in, is this Italian? Not sure what went on there. The Elephant in the Room, One Fat Man's Quest to Getting Smaller in a Growing America by Tommy Tomlinson. I listened to this on audiobook, and it is about a man who is attempting to lose weight, which is a problem in the United States. We see right here at the beginning, BMI of 60.7, shirts are this XXX whatever L, and he is very overweight, and this is a discussion of him losing that weight. And the audiobook was quite moving. I would recommend getting the audiobook version. I did like this one. Midnight in Chernobyl by Adam Higginbottom. This was another one that I listened to on audiobook, and it discusses Chernobyl, how it came to be, both the power plant and then the disaster and the fallout of it. This was fantastic. I'm starting to get the sense that Adam Higginbottom is known for his writing, and this was not an unpopular book. You see 50,000 ratings, 5-star, my review, but 4.37 aggregate, and it was a Goodreads Choice Awards. I don't know if that means anything, but it also won a lot of other literary awards. So if you're interested in reading about Chernobyl, I feel like this is the book out there to go. Again, listen to the audiobook while on a road trip across the United States, and it was fantastic. Very sobering. Of course, there was a cost of human life, and there was a lot of bravery done to prevent any more cost, but I think it was well done, and I really liked the writing and the narration. The Hiking Book from Hell by Ari Calvo. So this is about a Norwegian who is not very interested in Norwegian? I think it's Norwegian. Norwegian or Norway or Sweden, but I think Norway. He decides to start hiking even though he's never hiked a day in his life, or he doesn't enjoy hiking, I should say. He's hiked before. He doesn't enjoy hiking, but hiking is kind of the national pastime. So he decides he's going to start hiking. It is humorous, it's outdoor, it's nature, but it's kind of a funny telling of someone who doesn't like hiking choosing to go hiking. And I think it's entertaining. Yeah. Check it out. I like hiking, so it was a different opinion for me. Waking the Witch, Reflections on Women, Magic, and Power by Pam Grossman. I feel like this was a good overview of the way the witch has been portrayed in both older times, but also in modern media. I felt like the media portion was really well done. I listened to this on audiobook. I just felt like it was a good introduction to the topic. So we have like this early modern Europe and Salem, which is the most common witch trial known in the United States, to we see this whole section on like pop culture. So I really felt like the blending of that was good. I took a lot of long walks while listening to this audiobook because it was fascinating. Jung Mi-yoon, The Pink and Blue Project. This is a Korean photographer, Korean, I mean South Korean, who photographs little children in their rooms, and he's talking about the color choices of young girls and boys, and also maybe discusses why these color choices are kind of pushed on, and also taking a few photographs of the same individuals years later when they have more decisions over their room and their colors and things like that. This is a fascinating photography collection. I just was so intrigued, and the colors and the way the book is put together is very well done. I like it. I would love to pick up a copy of this. There were some essays in the middle which provided some context to what you're seeing, but really the photography is what stood out. Fantastic. Gods of the Upper Air. So this is by Charles King. This is a book that describes the founding of cultural anthropology and goes through the big names in it. So we have Boas, Margaret Mead. There's one other one that Franz Boas. Anyways, Ruth Benedict. There's some big names that come up a lot when we talk about the foundation of anthropology in the early 1900s, and this book kind of went through all of them and how they were connected and how they interacted with one another. This is actually the book that got me into audiobooks. I hadn't really done audiobooks before this one, but I had a short, brief time. It was like one month where I was having to commute like an hour to go to my job before I found an apartment closer, and during that time I was not going to, after an hour, there's only so much music you can listen to, I feel like. And so I decided to give audiobooks a try, and this was the first audiobook I listened to. Fantastic, loved it, and I've been hooked on audiobooks ever since. And the topic was good. I feel like I got a good overview of this time in anthropology, and it's come in handy when discussing other books in the future, or that I've read since then. Rankavu, Japanese Masterpieces, Orchid Woodblock Prints. Am I really the only rating on this? This is, again, it's like, Japanese woodblock prints and other pieces of art that are around these orchids that have been carefully cultivated by a botanical group, a horticulturist. And this was a really fantastic blend of those two subjects, and I thought it was fascinating. I don't know much about gardening, so there was a whole section in the back about what was crossed with what to get what sort of orchids, but I felt like it kind of combined two interesting aspects into one. I cannot believe I'm the only person who rated this on Goodreads. This is truly a hidden gem. I love this one. This was another one, Skullface bookseller, Honda-san, Volume 1. I've actually only read Volumes 1 and 2 because my library only has 1 and 2, but this is a semi-autobiographical, and the person is trying to keep their identity a secret, so they put themselves as like a skull face, talking about working in retail as a bookseller in Japan. I thought it was hilarious. I especially like this one. If you've ever worked in customer service, this is going to ring true in more ways than maybe you want. So I loved this one, loved this entry in the manga series. I've only read 1 and 2. Again, I don't know if there's any more, but that's all my library had. Komi Can't Communicate. This is a really popular series right now. I don't know why I have the Japanese version pulled up. I have not read it in Japanese. I don't read Japanese, by Tomohito Oda. This is a romance, a young adult romance manga. Not young adult, like high school romance. Yeah, I've been reading it, been loving it. I just read volume 29. So if you haven't checked out this one, I recommend that one. That one's also more popular. Tokyo by Liam Wong. This was a great photography collection. I didn't read the one with this cover. I read the one with this cover down here, but it's a photography collection on Tokyo. This photographer goes out at night and takes photographs, particularly focusing on like those neon signs that are very ubiquitous in Tokyo, and then he edits the photograph to give it a very cyberpunk feel. That's the only way I can describe it, and I love the results. This was fantastic. Loved it. Check it out. The photography is great. The editing's great. The whole collection's great. The Okay End of Funny Town by Mark Polanczak. This is a collection of short stories that are just real life gone a little different. I thought this was really, really funny. I don't understand why it only has 43 ratings because I thought it was great. I loved this one, and it's very short. It's kind of ideal for someone who doesn't have a lot of time but is looking to get back into reading. So I thought this was fantastic and recommend checking it out, especially if you're short on time and you want to just check out short fiction that errs on the side of fantastical and, I don't want to say paranormal, but a little outside normal life. This is the book for you to check out. Snow Glass Apples by Neil Gaiman and Colleen Doran. So this is a comic retelling of Snow White. I will recommend right off the bat that you do not give this to children without you checking it out, because even though it is now spun as a child story, this is not a child retelling. I believe that's even stamped in the cover. So check this out before you give it to a kid. It is classified under horror. I'm not sure if that's quite correct because I'm very sensitive to horror and that it wasn't horrifying. But it's what if the stepmother isn't the evil one, is kind of the basis of this retelling. Neil Gaiman's quite popular, so if you like him, I guess you'll like this. Vasily Kandinsky, Around the Circle. So this was a artist, and I have to admit, I don't know much about art, but he is a Russian abstractionist. and he was very interested in circles as the takeaway, but this was a very colorful book, and I felt like the amount of information presented in the book made it accessible to someone like me who doesn't know art, but also provided enough context to understand what's going on. It was a good book. The art really wins. It's kind of hard to sell art books that you should check out because I can't show you the art. I don't have these books. They're all from the library. But the art in this book is fantastic. Most of these books that I'm talking about have been reviewed on my channel, so you can check those out if you want more detailed reviews. Breaking the Age Code, How Your Beliefs About Aging Determine How Long and Well You Live by Becca Levy. This was a really, really interesting book. It kind of falls into the self-helpy section, but I felt like the science here was quite interesting. A lot of the takeaways here were about cultures that view aging as more of a positive versus those that view aging as a negative. The United States is definitely one that views aging as a negative. Looking older is not considered a sign of respect or wisdom. It's seen as negative. You need to hide it. You need to get work done. You need to take fillers. Aging is not considered good. But the way that we view ourselves aging, what we actually believe us to be capable of doing does impact how well we age. And most people, if you talk about people not wanting to live a long time, what they actually don't want to do is not be able to do things they love to do. They don't want their body to break down on them. And this is kind of an interesting book that talks about the way that you view the aging process has an impact on the aging process, or how you self-limit in the aging process as you go along. Love this one. The subplot, I see it because it's right here. It's taking its sweet time to load. The subplot, What China is Reading and Why It Matters by Megan Walsh. I didn't know I wanted to read this book until I read it. And this is about what particularly fiction is popular in China right now and how it's driving the publishing landscape and what's being put online. This was interesting because as someone who lives in the United States, which is also a large consumer and a large culture in the world, I kind of know what's popular here. I complained about it at the beginning of this video. I know what books are popular, but I don't really know what China is reading. And they are a massive country. They have a lot of economic power, and that is growing, and they have a lot of people, and they are a force. They're not a small country that maybe, I don't want to say insignificant, but that isn't as well known. So I feel like not knowing what's going on in the literary landscape, as it says right here, maybe that's something I wanted to fill. And at first I was just intrigued, but I think Megan Walsh did a really good job, so I gave it a 5-star. Embroidery, I can see again from up here as the page loads. This is the art of Yoshioka. This is a fantasy art book. This was so cool. I do not know anything about the artist. I just saw this on my library shelf and decided to check it out, and it was fantastic. It was a great read. I do recommend. I do have the book review on my channel if you want to check out the art. This is another one where I'm trying to sell you on the art when you can't see the art, but trust me, the art is fantastic, and the packaging the book came in is also fantastic. So check out that one if that's interesting to you. This is another National Geographic photography collection. I say that because these National Geographic photography collections are excellent. This is just titled Women, and it's just pictures of women throughout the world, from the average citizen to people who are well known, like we see right here, Jane Goodall on the cover. And some of these are Nat Geo photos that we're familiar with. We have that girl from Afghanistan in the upper left-hand corner, but the entire book is fantastic. It is big. It's like a coffee book style, or coffee table book style, but it's worth getting, it's worth collecting. I'm sure it costs about $400 to purchase, but my library has it, and this would be a perfect gift for me too, so please buy it. The National Geographic photography collections always seem to hit, like that Dawn to Dusk one I was talking about. This is another book on Fukushima. I told you I read a lot, 3 or 4 books on it a couple months ago. March 2011, there was a tsunami and an earthquake. Well, the earthquake and then the tsunami that destroyed and did a lot of damage to the nuclear power plant in Fukushima. And this is a comic or a graphic novel which talks about a man who stayed behind to take care of the animals in that evacuation zone. So this was really interesting. I had not really heard of this individual, or I'd heard of him only in passing. I didn't really know much about him. And it was very interesting to hear his story in the comic book style. I think it makes it really accessible. And also, instead of dealing with this big disaster, we've kind of zoomed in on one person. This was a killer book. Flawless Lessons in Looks and Cultures from the K-Beauty Capital by Elise Hu. So K-Beauty is massive. I don't really follow the beauty industry, so you'd think I wouldn't know anything about it, but I know that K-Beauty is absolutely huge. They have successfully exported a beauty standard to another country, other countries, the West, and they have done it in fine fashion, and they're getting us to spend a lot of money on beauty. And they've done it successfully. There's a whole section of this book that talks about the power that comes with being able to set trends like this, and the fact that South Korea is doing it quite well. However, in addition to discussing some of the technology and advances from K-Beauty, Elise Hu takes a lot of this book to talk about the effects on women, the problems this presents, and some of the beliefs that come out of this. I thought this book was really fascinating. I actually wrote up a whole review, and then I realized my review was scathing, not in the sense that I thought the book was bad. I think the book is an absolute must-read for anyone, whether or not you engage with K-Beauty or not. Even if you're not even a woman and you think this has nothing to do with you, this is a must-read. I just felt like my review was maybe throwing some people under the bus. So I decided I couldn't have a positive review. I wasn't going to review it. I didn't want to make people mad, but I think this is the kind of book that will get you thinking and talking to other people. So I recommend this to everyone. I recommend all these to everyone. Next up is Land Art, Creating Artworks in and with the Landscape by James Brunt. This man does art in the landscape is the best way I can describe it. There's an example here. He has these leaves that he has put in a circle, and all of the art is just like this. It's found items in nature that have been arranged in an artwork style. Fantastic, fantastic, fantastic. He has a whole section at the beginning where he talks about how he doesn't harm the landscape when he does this, how he tries to have minimal impact. So there's the environmental conscious portion, and the part of this book I liked most was the section where he talked about a year that he was able to spend at a certain location doing art, basically. And he photographs them, and it's super cool. 21 ratings, that just seems really low because the art is so cool. It's a 5-star read, for sure. Japanese Yokai and Other Supernatural Beings by Andreas Marx. So the yokai are these supernatural, paranormal, it says right here, the translation of yokai looks like it's demons, but demons, monsters, ogres, ghosts, magicians, basically all these supernatural mythical beings from Japanese folklore that have been collected in one book. So Andreas Marx has the text, which explains what you're looking at, as well as the art that is relevant to the specific yokai that you're looking at in a really well put together book. I feel like this is the standard for yokai. I've read a couple other ones, including other good books on yokai, and this one was just fantastic. I think the blend of having the art to go with the text really made the book stand out, and I really recommend checking this one out. Hyperborea, Stories from the Arctic, Evgenia Arbugaeva. This is a book that I read very, very recently, as in like last week, and it's photography from Siberia, from the very northern expanses and reaches of Russia. And there's a lot of interplay with light in these photographs, but it is just a fantastic read. I was not looking for this book when I found it, but it's a book that I really have come to enjoy, and I went through it a couple times, and I loved it. It only has 12 ratings now, but it is, I think, a newer book. Yeah, published 2023, late last year, so hopefully it gets more because it deserves all of the accolades that it is getting, and is very close to 5-star review and rating on Goodreads, so I really recommend checking this out. Surreal Numbers by Donald Irvin Knuth, and I did look it up. I think it is pronounced Knuth, not Nuth. So this is a math book that was recommended to me, and it was written in the 70s by, he goes by D.E. Knuth, as you can see down here. And the idea is there's a frame story of two young adults who run off to live on this tropical island in pure happiness, but they quickly get bored and they discover there's a stone, and there's this disembodied voice of God, who I believe is James Conway, and he basically coaches them into building the basis of mathematics from like set theory, and it says here, turned on to pure mathematics and found total happiness. And I just really liked this book. I feel like it explained some basis of mathematics in a very enjoyable way, and from the 70s I don't think a lot of people would discover it on their own. It reminds me a lot of The Big Bang of Numbers by Manos Suri, but in maybe a less accessible format necessarily. I'm not sure. but I thought this was a fantastic book. Hawksbill Station by Robert Silverberg. So this is a nominee. This was a finalist for Best Novella. Or was it a winner of novella? For the Hugos. It was either a finalist or a winner for the Hugos. And in this story, we have a political landscape that has changed where political prisoners are sent back in time to the ancient eras. Right here it says late Cambrian era. So you disagree with the government, you get put in a machine, and you get spit backwards to the Cambrian era where you're going to live. Time travel only works one direction, so the people are spit out backwards, and they are living in this camp trying to make the best of life. I thought this was really interesting. I thought it was a cool idea that you send political prisoners back to the Cambrian era, and also some of the things that happen when you just dump a bunch of political prisoners back in time with no oversight. So they're not sent with, like, overseers or guards, they're just spit back on time. And they don't really check on, see what anything's doing. So, this was fun. Shinhanga, the new print movement of Japan by Barry Till. So Shinhanga was the art movement that came after ukiyo-e, and it was in tandem with other art movements that were happening at this time. I really like the art style of the Shinhanga prints, and this book had a collection of interesting prints that were done, in my opinion, very well. They were very colorful, the prints were well sized, and I felt like the text to print ratio was really good. This is beautiful. I also just like the cover. You'll see some of these, I technically gave a 4-star review, but I don't update my Goodreads reviews when I, upon further reflection, think maybe something's a 5-star. So this is a 5-star recommendation. The Man in the Maze by Robert Silverberg and Neil Gaiman. So this was also a book that was recommended by a viewer of my channel, and the idea is there's an individual who is needed for political purposes. His man is Richard Mueller, and Mueller is cursed. So he does not want to live next to other people, so he decides to hole up in the middle of a maze on this planet. The maze is almost a third character in this book because as the book progresses, people are trying to get to the middle of the maze to talk Mueller into coming out to aid his country, his people, his political party, whatever, in additional needs that they have. But Mueller is, of course, very upset with the way his life has gone and having been cursed. He doesn't want to live near humans at all, so he's holed up in this maze. I really like this. I thought it was fun. I think about this story a lot. It was written in, I don't know, 60s? Yeah, first published 1968. So the writing of the women are kind of weak, but that's just something I expect from a book written at this time, unfortunately. The rest of it was just fantastic. So I think my 4-star was really because of some very flat, one-dimensional female characters. But the story was good enough where, if this was published now, I do think that if this book was published now, I would come down more harshly on the authors. But considering the time and the era that it was written, it's going to be what it's going to be. Euler's Gem, The Polyhedron Formula and the Birth of Topology by David Richeson. Topology is what we call rubber sheet geometry. So instead of the geometry that most of us know and are familiar with, we're really concerned about like the shape, like a sphere is a sphere, a pyramid is a pyramid. Instead, in topology, we're allowed to bend and distort the items and think about things and properties that are the same or that are different between all of these. And it's quite a fascinating field that most people aren't exposed to until they reach higher mathematics in college, and most people don't reach that far. Even if they're interested in math, unless you pursue a math degree, this is a field that you probably won't have a lot of familiarity with. But this book introduces this very fascinating field that most people won't experience in a way that's accessible to anyone with a high school education. So I love this book. Fantastic. Put me on the field of topology. In the Grip of the Whirlwind, The Armistice Day Storm of 1940 by Tom Powers. So this one, I want to start with saying this is like a, not self-published, but a small press published book. And I feel like when we see books like this, sometimes we have opinions that have formed, like, why couldn't you get published by a traditional publisher? But I don't think that's necessarily the case in, well, that is the case. People do feel that way. But this is a book that I want you to overlook that to read, is what I'm trying to say. Because it talks about a specific storm that blew through the Midwest that really was devastating, and I had never heard of, even though it was quite severe. So basically, with a lack of modern predicting power, there was a storm that blew through the Midwest unexpectedly. The day started out very warm, so there was a lot of people out and about. We have people on highways. We have a lot of duck hunters who had gone out inappropriately equipped. And when the temperatures dropped and a massive storm blew through, and this would be early November, that's Armistice Day, right? Early November. It killed a lot of people who were caught out. We see right here the storm took 154 lives. And I think Tom Powers writes about this story in a very compelling way. So if you're interested in history, but a focus of history that focuses on maybe more local events, this would be a fantastic book to read. Obviously, it was a tragedy, but it was a very interesting story about how things went wrong before we had modern weather predicting technology. Nichijou. I just, again, pulled one random volume by Kiichi Araue. This is a slice of life that is really quite random, but it's quite funny. There's also an anime off of it. It's sweet. I love the covers. There's just like a lot of, I don't know if you call them vignettes, just little slices of life, quite literally slices of life in a slice of life manga of these schoolgirls who are living life. Kiichi Araue has also written another series that focuses on a college age girl called City, which I'm actually rereading right now. It's another one of those book series that fell through the cracks when I switched library systems. So we're back at it. I have the books out and I'm keeping reading it. I like Kiichi Araway's drawing style, humor style. I like all of it. The covers are fantastic. I mean, I think they're probably some of the best manga covers in the game, so love that. Check it out. Japan Journeys, famous woodblock prints of cultural sites in Japan, again by Andreas Marx. He's been on this list twice. This is woodblock prints that are related to, as we see here, cultural sites in Japan from a wide variety of artists. I love Japanese woodblock prints. I think they're so cool and so fantastic. This was a fantastic book done by the same publisher, if I remember correctly, as that yokai book, that Japanese yokai and other supernatural beings that he wrote. Fantastic, super cool. If you're looking to get into woodblock prints, I feel like this is the entry point because it gives you a wide variety of artists to look at and a wide variety of sites that have been printed, so you can choose where you want to go from there. Definitely a 5-star read. Ichi F, a worker's graphic memoir of the Fukushima nuclear power plant by Kazuto Tatsuda. This, similar to that Guardian of Fukushima book that I read, is a telling of what happened in the Fukushima power plant disaster. And the reason I like stories like this and that Guardian of Fukushima is instead of focusing on the big story, which is sometimes relevant, we're focusing on an individual's experience with that story. So this is kind of the difference between Adam Higginbotham's Midnight at Chernobyl, which focuses on everything that went wrong at Chernobyl, to a book like this, which is a manga series of a cleanup worker after the disaster had occurred. And I like books like this because it kind of gives us a boots on the ground view of what happened and a much more intimate view of what went wrong. Because sometimes I think we get so overwhelmed by it's hard to see the whole big picture and understand how it impacted individuals unless we have those personal anecdotes. I think that's just how the human mind works. Hearing what someone else personally went through means a lot more to us than 2,000 people died in a disaster in Japan, or however many people died. It was more than that, but I like books like this because they provide a more nuanced view of what happened. So this was a quite big manga, it's like series. They're all put together in one, so it's like over 500 pages, but it's a worker who did the cleanup after the disaster. And I really liked this too because when we have nuclear disasters, what was it, 3 Mile Island? 3 Mile Island? But also Chernobyl, Fukushima. After the disaster occurs and is contained, there's a lot of cleanup that has to happen. And that cleanup is very, very important. And that's what has to happen here. And that's what he talks about. And I liked it. City. So this is the one by Kiichi Araue that I was talking about. So this is focused on a college girl who's just trying to pay rent and get through school. Super funny. Really liked it. If you like Nichijou, you'll like City. If you like City, check out Nichijou. It's the same humor style. As we can see from the cover, it's very much the same art style as well, which I really like. And I read through volume 3 the first time, but now I have through volume 4 out, and I'm really excited to keep reading this series. The Edge of Memory is this one, I can tell from this. Ancient stories, oral tradition, and the post-glacial world. So this one talks about how these ancient stories that have been passed down in groups have a basis in things that occurred in nature, and his premise is that these may be rooted in here, I'm just reading from here, may be rooted in scientifically verifiable facts and can explain things like ancient eruptions or ancient flooding or things that are important for us to remember. So I liked this book. I felt like it explored why we tell stories and some of the reasons we tell stories. I thought it was very interesting, and I still think about this one a lot, especially because Patrick Nunn thinks that we can kind of go into this prehistory era that is kind of hidden from us in a way that not a lot of things allow us to look into. Things like archaeology, but stories are another way. In Pain, a bioethicist's personal struggle with opioids, Travis Reeder. So this one was really interesting to me. I actually distinctly remember what I was doing when listening to this audiobook, because I listened to this on audiobook. I was moving. So I was walking all of my stuff up and down stairs, into and out of trucks and cars. I was moving. But this was a very interesting book because the opioid epidemic is an epidemic in the United States, and it has claimed a lot of people's lives. And I think one of the things that maybe people might not be familiar with is how easy it is to get hooked, and not all of the people who get involved with these opioids are people who are maybe making poor decisions with their lives up front. So Travis Reeder was in a motorcycle accident, and in the hospital he was put on opioids because they are really good for blocking acute critical pain in the moment. The problem comes when you're not appropriately weaned off them. You can develop dependency, and even in a hospital setting, that dependency means that you're going to have to go through a very painful withdrawal process. So Travis Reeder writes about that process that he went through, and talks about then things he looked into, like why we use these so frequently. Are they really the appropriate pain medication in all cases? And how do we handle this epidemic? And how do we approach this topic appropriately to where we're not leaving people with a crushed leg from a motorcycle accident in pain, which would be cruel, without causing problems like having to go through a withdrawal process because you were unconscious and had a shattered leg and needed to have pain. Like, how do we balance all of that? And I think that this was a very fantastic, well done book. Blood Runs Cold, the Yablonsky Murders and the Battle for the United Mine Workers of America by Mark A. Bradley. So in 1969, turn of the century, there was a murder that occurred, and this was the result of an internal power struggle with the United Mine Workers of America. So I thought this was a very interesting book that focused on a kind of local history event in the United States. It talked about the United Mine Workers of America, some of the corruption that occurred there, attempts to do internal reform through Jock Yablonsky, and how the establishment inside the United Mine Workers of America was willing to resort to murder in order to keep the status quo. And I felt like this was a very interesting book. It was true crimey in a sense, but it wasn't true crime in the fact that we don't know who did it. It was true crime in the sense that you know who's doing it, you know who did it, and it's more about why this happened and how these circumstances came about and what this meant for the United Mine Workers of America. I don't like reading true crime just for like the novelty and thrill of it. I feel like there has to be a reason behind why I'm reading true crime. So I like reading true crime when I think there's truly something to get out of it. And I truly got something out of this one, so I liked it. Basilisks and Beowulf, Monsters in the Anglo-Saxon World by Tim Flight. This was a discussion on monsters in the Anglo-Saxon world, so early Britain, and we see here it draws on a wide variety of topics. There's a lot of emphasis on Beowulf, which is one of the first major written pieces in English, Old English, but English, and what monsters meant to them, what the framework was. There was a lot of emphasis on boundaries in this book, so monsters being outside boundaries and monsters also being those that can transcend boundaries, and also a very interesting look at the humans who might be monsters as well. So this was a fantastic book. Really interesting. Probably one of the best monster books I've read. Just loved it. Really recommend. Border Crossings, A Journey on the Trans-Siberian Railway by Emma Fick. This is just a drawing travelogue. That's the best way I can describe it. It's Mark Tira's graphic novels, which is correct. She took the Trans-Siberian Railway, so that train that goes from Mongolia, well, it says here from Beijing, but all the way through Moscow. So that long train ride that's quite popular, I would say, or well known at the very least. I think this would be such a cool train ride to take. However, I know that the country I reside in is not always on good terms with Russia. So I would be a little nervous about that, but hopefully one day I can take this train ride because I think it's really fascinating and goes through a lot of interesting, beautiful parts of the world. So this was a fantastic look at that. There I'm back. Photographs from the Edge by Jimmy Chin. This was a photography collection by Jimmy Chin, who is well known for some of his other work. He is the director of Free Solo, which I think a lot of people know about, and he photographs people doing these extreme climbs, these extreme activities, and the photography was unparalleled. That being said, the acts were very scary. I would not be doing anything in this book. There are people hanging off edges, sleeping, people free climbing rock structures. I'm not that sort of adrenaline person. I don't get any extra kick out of something knowing I could die. But the photography was fantastic. And as we can see, 889 people agree with me with 4.74 ratings. This is a 5-star read. I don't know why I gave it 4-star, probably because having just read it, it was very stressful. Because people were, I felt like, at the edge of death. Also, almost every other page in here was like, this is so-and-so who liked doing snowboarding down Mount Everest. Rest in peace. He died in X, Y, and Z. I was like, yeah, well, there is a risk. But it was fantastic. Worlds Beyond Time, Sci-Fi Art of the 1970s by Adam Rowe. So this is a look at the art that defined mostly book covers, but science fiction and fantasy, well, mostly science fiction, in the 1970s. This was a very distinct style and distinct colors, and it was a fantastic look at the art that characterized that time. Fantastic. I feel like trying to sell you an art book to read without showing you the art is really not the way to do this, because I have nothing to show you to be like, look at this, it's super cool. Just trust me, I do have a book review of this on my channel if you need to be sold on the art. The art is fantastic. We see here visual history of spaceships, alien landscapes, cryptozoology, imagined industrial machinery. I mean, there's everything. There's a wide variety of artists. Fantastic. Highly recommend. The Big Bang of Numbers, How to Build the Universe Using Only Math by Manal Suri. This is like, in my mind, Surreal Numbers by D.E. Knuth, but this is more of the accessible version. The Big Bang of Numbers is designed for that person who started hating math in about first grade and never grew out of it, but now maybe as an adult has more of an interest towards mathematics and wants to learn a little bit more about it. For those people, I would recommend The Big Bang of Numbers, but for people who maybe have an interest in math, maybe did kind of well in math through high school, or at least had an innate interest through high school, I would recommend Surreal Numbers. But I don't want to tell you that what you can and can't read or that you can't understand Surreal Numbers, but Manal Suri was a little bit more accessible in where they started. And well, Surreal Numbers went kind of quickly, where in Surreal Numbers, if they introduced a concept, they expected you to remember it. Manal Suri was more forgiving in reviewing what had already been discussed, if that makes sense. Kyosai's Animal Circus by Sadamuro Koto. Kyosai was a Japanese artist, and he does a lot of fun animal prints, or he did, he is deceased. But this was a fun little look at the animals that he did by Sadamuro Koto. I've actually read several books by her. She does seem to be a leading researcher in the field of Kyosai's work, and this was just a fun, a little over 100-page look. It's from the Israel Goldman collection. I also read some other books from the Israel Goldman collection. Super fun. Loved it. If you're interested in Japanese prints, this would be a great place to start. Yeah, Kawanabe Kyosai is one of my favorite Japanese print artists. Emergent Tokyo, Designing the Spontaneous City. I actually read the one that had this cover right here, and this is discussing urban design in Tokyo and how Tokyo has a very distinct feel because of its urban design and urban, I guess it's saying here, urban patterns. I like this. It explained how different regions of Tokyo wound up the way it does, how they use space in Tokyo, which is a very distinct city, and I thought it was fantastic. Only 190 ratings, so not super popular, but I felt like this was really interesting. Year of No Garbage, Recycling Lies, Plastic Problems, and One Woman's Trashy Journey to Zero Waste by Eve O. Schaub. I feel like This book intrigued me because I was interested in the journey to zero waste. I'm very interested in watching people on like YouTube or other places that talk about their zero waste journey, and these are the people who talk about how they can fit all their trash for a year in a jar, which I certainly can't do. But I am very aware that in some regards humans have moved from using the planet to abusing the planet, and we could all use to cut back on the amount of garbage that we produce, particularly in the United States. We are a massive garbage producer, and all of us have things that we can do. And so Eve Schaub goes out on a journey with some basic guidelines and rules to basically reduce the amount of garbage that her and her family are producing. There's a lot of research in here on things like what happens when you put stuff in the recycling. I think that was probably the biggest eye-opener for me. I knew that not all recycling got recycled. I was not under this notion that everything I put in my mixed stream recycling bin was going to be permanently recycled. I knew some things were not permanently recyclable at the same quality, so some of this I knew. But just seeing how much stuff isn't recyclable, or maybe how there isn't really plans for stuff, really makes you think that maybe we need to take a step back. The 3 R's: reduce, reuse, recycle. I think a lot of Americans could work on the reducing section first. I am a very, very big believer in this, the need to reduce trash, and I don't think we have to necessarily give up a high quality life to reduce trash. But I think in many cases our use of the planet goes from use to abuse, and I think use is fine, I think abuse is not very fine. So, this was a very fascinating book. Oops. Thornhedge by T. Kingfisher. This is a retelling of a fairy tale. I liked it. It's a novella, so it's quite short. It was actually nominated for Best Novella in, it looks like, for Hugo for 2024, as well as the Nebula and the Locusts. I read it. It was fantastic. I would say this falls more on the popular side with 25,000 ratings, but loved this one. I see she's written other ones too, unless this is just a different copy in a different language. I liked this one. A Stroke of the Pen, I can see because of this. This is actually a collection that has been found by Terry Pratchett fans. So Terry Pratchett sadly passed away several years ago. Love his work, Discworld, all of that. But Terry Pratchett did a lot of writing before he became popular. Like most artists. Most artists don't start out by doing their best work right out the gate, and most artists need to take a lot of practice to get to the point where they're producing fantastic stuff. So before Discworld, he wrote a lot of stuff in the 70s and 80s under other names, so under pseudonyms. And these fans were looking for something, or they were doing something. They were doing something in the what do you call it? Archives, that's what I'm looking for, and they found that these things that Pratchett had written under another name, and those have been collected in this Stroke of the Pen collection, and it is fantastic. Now, don't expect Discworld level writing, don't expect Discworld settings, but definitely expect a lot of the same themes and the same humor style that you've come to know and enjoy, because, yeah, that's what is really being presented in this book. And it's short, a little over 240 pages. Oh, the one I read was not 240, I don't think. Maybe it was. It did not feel like 240 pages. It felt very short because it's short stories. The Nocebo Effect, When Words Make You Sick, by Michael Bernstein, Charlotte Blees, Cosimo Lasher, Walter Brown, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of people. So the Nocebo Effect is the lesser-known companion to the placebo effect, which most of us know. The Nocebo Effect is that when you believe something bad is going to happen, when you believe something is going to make you sick, when you believe something, like a medicine is going to make you sick, a medicine is going to have a bad side effect, you're more likely to experience that side effect when you believe that side effect is going to occur. And this was super fascinating. I read this book. It was interesting. It's written for a lay audience, and I thought it was a very fascinating read on the effect that normally isn't talked about. So it says right here, Nocebo Effect, the placebo effect's evil twin. I think it's correct. I think this was a fantastic read. A Divine Language, Learning Algebra, Geometry, and Calculus at the Edge of Old Age by Alec Wilkinson. This is about a man who did not do well at math in school. He thought it was confusing. He thought it was not easy to understand. But as an adult, he says at the edge of old age, I think he was like 50, he decided to take it upon himself to learn mathematics. And he wanted to see what he could learn. And so this book is about his self-study journey at mathematics, but he doesn't talk about like, first I used this textbook and then I went through these problems this time of day. And I think that's where people kind of fell off the plot, and I think it got a lower rating than it necessarily deserved, because this book was absolutely fantastic. He talks about his mindset as he learns mathematics, he talks about his struggles, he talks about his goals, and maybe why he didn't like math in the first place. So instead of just being like a guide, hey, do you want to self-study mathematics? It was more of this memoir philosophy style where he talked about the meaning behind what he was doing. And for that reason, I think there's a disconnect between how I thought about the book and how people rated it. I think maybe people were looking for more of a self-study guide, and instead they got a philosophy opinion book. Mathematics for Human Flourishing by Francis Su. So this book is about mathematics, but not in the way that you would think. It definitely, again, falls more into the philosophy section, where he talks about the way that math can help us individually flourish. There's a lot of interviews in here with a particular man who is currently serving time in prison, but who has decided to start self-studying mathematics. Not Francis Su, but a second individual. Christopher Jackson, that's his name. Christopher Jackson, who discovered mathematics as an inmate in federal prison. So Francis Su believes that mathematics can bring out the best in all of us, and that's the premise of this book, and that's what he writes about. 987 ratings, average 4.27. I would say this is a 5-star read. Legends of the Nahanni Valley by Hammerson Peters. So again, thinking of R.M. Patterson's The Dangerous River book, this is again set in that same area of Canada. And I was looking for just a collection of tales, stories, mythology from that region, both collected from the native Dene sources, but also from the gold prospector, early, for lack of a better term, white people history of the area. And this book met the goal. It is self-published, or published under this guy's publishing house, so self-published. But don't let that dissuade you. It's over 500 pages, and it is an excellent collection where Hammerson Peters has really gone through the archives and taken the time to dig up all of these interesting, fascinating pieces of information, stories, and fantastic book. Loved it. Wicked Women of Detroit by Tobin T. Buke. This was a very interesting book. So at first I was just intrigued. I'm like, wicked women, how? What were they doing? Are we talking murderers? Or are we just talking people who weren't following social norms, as this woman down here looks like? But this was a really fun book. This was about women, mostly people who were interested in conning other people, maybe people who had violent pasts, but it was an interesting look at how crime was able to occur before we had things like the internet or just access to sharing information between cities. There's a lot of scheming, and there's a lot of getting away with things because you just cried in court and made the male jury feel bad, and there's a lot of interesting tales of women who are interesting. We'll just say it like that. This was a surprise read. I didn't think it was going to be as good as it was. I was really just intrigued by the wicked women part, and it wound up being a lot more interesting than I thought. I think Tobin T. Buke did a really good job. Soul Full of Coal Dust, A Fight for Breath and Justice in Appalachia by Chris Hamby. So this is a book on black lung. Black lung is a disease that occurs in the lungs having been exposed to a large amount of coal dust, or there's other ways you can get exposed to it. I believe brown lung is one that occurs when exposed to something else, but this is very common in mining communities among men who have been working in coal dust with inadequate protection for years. And the mining companies don't really want to own up. That's a very common problem. They don't want to admit that the work in their coal mines is what caused these problems to occur, and so they fight back. And this whole story is about how black lung occurs, how these people got it, and most importantly, the legal fights of these individuals to get compensation for their time, and some of the things that these companies are doing to cover up. We see right here, big coal cover-up. They were trying to cover up how severe the problems were in their mines, because that would mean admitting fault and having to pay up. And the essence of this book is these companies kind of churn through men. They get young boys, they run them through the ringer in their mines, and when they have old, broken down bodies, they spit them out with no compensation or recognition for having basically signed up for a death sentence. And it is an occupational disease, essentially, but they have to fight to prove that to get their money. Fascinating, very important, and very similar to another book that I read called The Cancer Factory that was related that I've read recently. Both these are reviewed on my channel, or at least Cancer Factory is reviewed on my channel. Pantheon, The True Story of the Egyptian Deities by Hamish Steele. This is a comic series that talks about the ancient Egyptian myths. Something about these ancient myths, both Babylonian, Egyptian, but also Greek, is sometimes putting them in some sort of organized chronological story is very hard and difficult because we know this story, and we know this story, and we know this story, but putting them all together isn't always good or isn't always easy to do. So this story puts things in more or less a straightforward manner in a comic book style. Now, be warned, this is not for kids, or if you want to give it to a kid, make sure you read through it first so you understand what you are giving them, because this is definitely not just PG rated. The Egyptian stories are full of all sorts of interesting things. We can see right here some of the stuff that happens, including some things that maybe you don't want your kids to be exposed to. But this was a very interesting read, and I really like the fact they are put in a comprehensive story plot line order in this graphic novel format. I loved it. I thought it was funny. A good introduction to ancient Egyptian mythology. Genesis by Sebastião Salgado. This is a photographer who was recommended to me in my comment section. So this is his massive, and I mean massive, arm workout, massive collection of photography that he has put together. So he's done photography his entire life from all over the world, and this is kind of one of those big collections that he has done. Fantastic. You want to get a copy of this for yourself and bring it home. Don't do what I did and try to get it out of the library. I mean, it was an arm workout to bring home, to bring back, to hold up, to review. So just do yourself a favor and pick yourself up a copy. The photography's worth it. It's primarily black and white, and he does a really good job. The final book I want to talk about is something that's way outside my comfort zone and not one that I really knew I was going to enjoy. The Man Who Quit Money by Mark Sundin. So this is another one kind of like Into the Wild, where it's an individual who's living a lifestyle that I myself am not going to live. He decided that money is evil and he wants to quit it. He doesn't want to participate in the monetary system of the United States. And now there is no law that says you have to participate in the monetary system of the United States, at least as far as I know of. You can just decide to not use money. Most of us, though, find money very convenient. It came into society for a reason, so we use it. But he decided he didn't want anything to do with it. It's this Daniel Suelo individual, and so he left his life savings, all $30 of it, in a phone booth in 2000, and he left without it. So he does not do money. We see right here, he doesn't pay taxes except food stamps or welfare. He lives in the caves in the Utah Canyonland, forages wild food, and gourmet discards. And he doesn't carry an ID, but he's able to continue to be alive. And so I really think this was an interesting idea of, again, a man who's making a life decision that I personally am not going to make. I think the convenience of money is very good, and I don't necessarily believe money in and of itself is the root of all evil. But it's a lot of interesting stories. We see here it did win some sort of Goodreads choice for best history or biography, and it's interesting. It's someone who's living a life that I wouldn't live that just got me thinking, and I probably will not do it, but it's interesting enough to read about. And so if you're looking for a different perspective on the monetary system than you currently have, this might be the book for you. So those were a small collection of my 5-star recommendations, or books that I think on further reflection are 5-star reads. Please share your recommendations below. Let's get a diverse collection of 5-star reads going. Please put yours in the comment section down below. I love to receive comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.